Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Interview Show series. I am Big Red 310, and my guest this week is.
The dirty white boy.
There we go. And so let's get it right off the bat. What got you into pro wrestling?
Um, what got me into pro wrestling? I would say it would be the fact that, when you're a little kid, you get to watch, you watch cartoons, and for me, wrestling was on after cartoons. I can like vividly remember being like 5 years old and like my morning starting out going out with my dad to get like some gingerbread cookies, coming back, watching Spider-Man, and then WWF Superstars and Beyond. And I basically got hooked in from that point on. Just that whole routine. I became a fan of the whole like wrestling package of the whole fast moving intro, the whole bigger than life characters, the in ring work, the promos, everything. Basically, from that moment on, I guess I was a fan, and I'd try to watch anything associated with wrestling. I'd go to like the video store, and I'd never rent an actual movie there. I'd normally find a Coliseum videotape and rent that for a weekend and probably watch it like 10 times.
Wow.
And yeah, exactly. I was that big into professional wrestling at a very very young age. So that's basically what it was. Just the transition from Saturday morning cartoons right into pro wrestling.
Do you remember a specific star, specific angle? Like, do you remember just anything that you really liked more than anything else in the show?
The most important thing for me would be the whole summer of Bret Hart versus Owen Hart, because not only were they Canadians, but there was something about that angle that just was the biggest attraction to me as a fan. Because I'm an only child, but my neighbor, like 2 doors down, who I was hanging out with, they're a smallerish family, but the older brother's name is Brett, and the younger brother is the kind of look the same as Owen. So I saw a little bit of similarities in that. It was just that whole angle of just what related to me is like you can totally tell what it'd be like to be a younger brother trying to admire the bigger star brother, and just that angle. I also remember vividly when Ted DiBiase brought back the Undertaker. I vividly remember sitting in my room watching him come out with the green lighting under his face and just being blown away. And Shawn Michaels' Heartbreak Hotel. I honestly, for the longest period of time, never would remember Shawn in the ring, but his promo segments were kind of what hooked me into being a Shawn Michaels fan, because he was so quick with the words. There was that whole aura around him with Diesel that you never wanted to touch him. Plus, around that point in time, Diesel had just won the Intercontinental Championship. So I was a fan of just a lot of the characters going on around that time. And then, I kind of got to see WCW also around then, and knowing about the Macho Man from a little bit of WWF and then to WCW got me hooked into that product as well.
Now, for many people that I've encountered on the show, some people, their parents absolutely hated it, wrestling. Some people, that's how they got into it. How were your parents with the whole wrestling thing? Were they with it? Were they not with it? What was their thoughts on it?
I think growing up, when I was like really young, they were like, "It's a phase. He'll definitely get out of it." I vividly remember one night when you're like a little kid and you don't want to go to bed. My parents one time told me that if you don't go to bed, wrestling won't be on TV, and I swear to God, I went to bed right away because I legit believed that. But I was like in finishing up elementary school, they were kind of getting annoyed to the point where like you kind of got to give this up. It's something stupid. But then, kind of once I got onto YouTube and some successful stuff happened, I think they sort of realized that it's something that's a part of me and that it's never going to go away. And for like big projects or something, they'd sometimes tell me, you're a wrestling fan, you got to go put a big one over, or go cut a big good promo out there. They would legit use these words. Just pretend you're cutting a big promo out there or something like that. So there's that. And then I found out through my mom that like my great grandpa was a wrestling fan in the days of like Haystacks Calhoun and stuff like that. So I kind of found that pretty interesting. So I guess it's passed down through generation as well.
Huh. And you started watching in the mid '90s, and there are many people who were big fans at the time. Like when Brian was on here a few weeks ago talking about it, he said that's when wrestling started kind of to falter. I know you were really young at the time, but even in like '94, '95, was there ever a period, even as young as you were, where you were like, this really isn't that good?
Well, no, because you're very young. There was a period of time where I wasn't as big of a fan into it when the Attitude Era started to make the transition, like when Brett had left WWF and it was just Shawn and Hunter being dicks on TV for like months. I really wasn't a fan of wrestling, and I think in reality that's what made me a bigger WCW fan because while the NWO was going on, and I did like the whole NWO concept, WCW had the great wrestling that I grew up on, and they had the Saturday morning shows still, which was just basically what I grew up on. Just a big main event, and then a lot of squash matches. So when Shawn was having his snarky attitudes and they were on the power trip, I wasn't that big of a fan of WWF. And then when the screw job happened, it made me kind of not like wrestling as much to an extent, but just how it was covered down here in Canada, which is obviously a lot different than how wrestling's ever going to be covered on TV back in the States, kind of made me also more intrigued in wrestling. So it maybe did a little bit good with the harm.
Okay. And obviously, we've spoken about Brett, the Brett Owen program, how big the screw job got covered in Canada. Would you say that Bret Hart really was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, icons in your young wrestling life, or was it Savage or someone else?
To me, it was a lot of people. I try to figure out when people ask me who's your favorite wrestler growing up, I really have to. There's a bunch of stages I'd go through. Like the first wrestler I was ever a big fan of, and a lot of people are going to be stunned by this, was Duke the Dumpster Droese. I have no idea why, but he was my favorite wrestler growing up. I guess it was just because there would be a garbage truck every Sunday morning going by, and I'm like, oh, that's Duke the Dumpster Droese. Maybe he'll come in and give me an autograph or something. I don't know. But when I went to a house show when I was like 4, he was like the only guy I went and saw. But getting older, it would probably be Brett because the whole Hart Foundation versus the United States angle was something that I know for a fact made kids growing up that weren't even fans of wrestling fans of the business because it was such a angle for Canadian kids to get behind Brett, and then you absolutely love him. I was a fan of Shawn, but not so much around like '97 and that point. Savage, like we talked about, is a big part of me being a fan because he's kind of the reason I went and switched to WCW, as I already mentioned, and I loved his finisher. But to me, for a while, it would be Bret Hart. But when Shawn retired, what was it, last year?
Almost 2 years ago, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I was more affected by him retiring that way, and I never realized how big of an impact he had on my life. Like, he'd always been on my TV, and now that he wouldn't really be on there like every week, it was kind of an odd situation for me. So it's kind of actually a tie between Brett, Shawn, Austin, and Rock in reality.
All right. And you mentioned some unhappiness. You liked Shawn at first with his promos, then you weren't so big on him when he was insulting Brett. When did you, as you were growing up, when did you start to kind of, grow more towards Shawn Michaels?
Well, even as a kid, I respected Shawn in the ring because everyone knew he was the best thing going. It was just around, '97, him just being a very big dick. And you could even tell through the TV that it wasn't like him playing the character. It was just him being a dick on the air. When did I become like a super fan? I guess, when he came back in '02, I guess would have to be the point I became a super, super fan. Because, I kind of had to take a look back and be like, he'd been out of wrestling for like 4+ years and had this incredible match with Triple H, and it's like he never left. As well, probably even though he was being a dick, the matches he had with Undertaker were something that made me a massive fan of him as well.
Okay. And also, something that is interesting to talk about, when did you, because you started watching when you were really young, when did you find out, or did you find out immediately that it was fixed? And how did that really affect your viewing of it?
I never I would say I found out actually at about a very early age. The story behind that would be the main event of WrestleMania 11 between Bam Bam Bigelow and Lawrence Taylor, and me, of course, not knowing that it was not fake or whatever. I for sure thought Bam Bam Bigelow was going to go in there, destroy Lawrence Taylor in like 5 minutes, and then that would have been WrestleMania. And my dad, who wasn't a fan, but he would take me to shows or anything just because, it was something I liked, said, oh, there's no way Lawrence Taylor's going to lose this match. And I'm like, you're crazy. There's not going to happen. And then the match happened and Lawrence Taylor won. So I kind of got the heads up at like about 5 years old that wrestling wasn't 100%. I guess I always kind of knew it wasn't 100% real. Probably by the time I was about 13 or 12, I kind of knew it was not real when I was reading stuff online by that point, and even sometimes without even reading anything, you could just tell how an angle or a storyline was going to be booked. So about 13 or 14.
Okay. And finally, when we talk about wrestling fan when you were young, what would you say, like up until before you became later in your adolescence, what was the peak for you as a fan?
I'm still trying to determine that, actually. I watch a lot of the stuff that happened in the past on YouTube. And to me, I would say the peak and the most enjoyable period of time for me as a wrestling fan would probably be just the entire year of 1997. Because, while WWF wasn't doing great business or anything, the stories they were telling were just fantastic. WCW was in its, I guess, first full year with the NWO angle. And while the NWO was, running roughshod, WCW at this point was booking it where there's at least a bit of glimmer of hope because they were still trying to get to Sting and Hogan at Starrcade. And if you watch the uncensored '97 pay-per-view when Sting finally decides that he's with WCW, that's just some incredible stuff. I thought the NWO was really cool as well. Plus the great technical wrestling. I loved, Ray, Dean Malenko, the Four Horsemen. I loved everything about WCW at that point in time. As well, I think I discovered ECW around that point in time. So just that entire year.
And obviously, we've spoken a lot about how WCW was very important to you. How did you take it when they went out of business?
I wasn't watching as much of it. I don't think it even aired here. It was kind of saddening that something that, I liked watching was going to go bye-bye, and that a lot of guys probably would never get a chance to ever, be back be in a mainstream role. Like a lot of the announcers and stuff like that, like, Scott Hudson had attempts with TNA, but they never worked out. So I was upset, but I was kind of more intrigued because I was hoping for some good stuff to happen out of it, and see some guys from WCW get a great chance in the real biggest organization in the world. Like I was happy to see what happened with Booker T because I was always a fan of Booker T and Harlem Heat growing up. And just a bunch of those guys like Dean Malenko got a decent break. Benoit at the time got a decent break. A lot of the guys actually made well out of it. So. I was sad, but I saw some good in it.
Was there a point in WCW's years that you just said, I can't be a fan of this anymore?
Probably around 99 when we could only get we had TBS over here at that point in time, but when you could only watch Thunder, and Thunder was just so bad, I was just like, there's no point in us even attempting to watch or find Nitro or anything like that. So probably just 1999 when, because Nitro and Raw used to be on our TSN, which is your ESPN equivalent, and they would air Raw live, but Tuesday the next day they'd air Nitro. So when I'd come home from school, I'd watch Nitro, but by like 99, they never aired that. They just would re-air Raw. So 1999 was when I was like done with WCW.
And I assume by this point, Austin and Rock were mainly, I assume they were really connecting with you, and that also kind of furthered that along.
Oh, absolutely, and as not just that, but Foley, the undercard development. Some of the characters the WWF had on the undercard. I like the Brood, D'Lo Brown, X-Pac. I've always been a fan of X-Pac, Sean Waltman, even from his 1-2-3 Kid days. But yes, for sure, the Rock Austin feud, even at like a very young age, I knew that this was something special, and I don't know if I'd ever seen guys click like that before.
And was there a point where, kind of like how WCW fell, was there a point from the Attitude Era to now, was there a specific point where you remember the WWF kind of fell from flavor with you?
Um, I don't know. I don't know. I'd say I guess what's going on now, it's kind of fallen in the flavor, but in between, I don't know. I wasn't too big on '05 or '06. They had some good moments, but it wasn't the same. Of course, it was WWE then, and that would be about then, but they really didn't click with me that much. They had moments, but I would say around then.
Okay. Now let's move a little more into the second main part of the opening topics of this interview. Obviously, you are one of the more well-known names in our community here. So I want to just ask, how did you find YouTube? How did you get on it? Did you get on the internet before YouTube? How did that come about?
Oh, with YouTube, it would be, I don't know. I remember coming home from work one night, and when I was like 15, I had my first job, and came home from work, and I was looking for either a song or something, and this YouTube page opened. And I didn't know anything. I just thought, oh, this will be a flash in the pan website that won't work. And so, since I was on it, I decided to skip searching for whatever I was searching for. And the first thing to me that always came to mind was search something about wrestling. So I just typed in WWF, and then like these toy commercials from like 1985 came out, and I'm like, there's some really rare stuff on here. So I searched like WWF 1994, and I got to rewatch Razor Ramon Diesel for the Intercontinental title on Superstars, which a match I hadn't seen since it aired live. So that's when I found YouTube. But I mean, I was searching stuff online probably since I was like 12. Like I was looking to buy like tapes from tape traders, people who had like entire seasons of Superstars and Nitros and Raws, and even the older stuff like Saturday Night Main Event. I was always interested in that. So stuff like that. So since I was like 12, I've been searching the internet. Like I remember finding Obsessed with Wrestling and just being like, this is the site for me. So since about like 12, man.
And when did you decide to start making videos?
Probably once I saw Bill and Doug make videos. Because I knew a lot about wrestling, but there was never a platform where you could openly come out about wrestling and your fandom for it. Like, I had some friends, even in high school, who were, closet wrestling fans, but I always just felt awkward talking about wrestling with them because I'd always be with a group of guys, and still, wrestling will always have the dirty, oh my god, you like wrestling whole tone to it. So I always felt awkward doing that, and when I saw them make videos, it was like, and I saw other people as well. Like, I remember seeing Crazy Mike and Bill and Doug, I think, were the first couple I had seen, and Pearson 101. And then I decided to go out and make, a video. I asked for a video camera for my one birthday, and I had it, and I made my first video with the infamous words, "Yo, what's poppin' G?" And from that point on, I was on doing videos.
By this point, you said you'd been kind of searching the internet already. Have you kind of already looked at what's going on in the indies, what's going on in Japan, or did that come through making videos?
Japan and stuff was around. I'd been a fan of like Japan and Lucha Libre since I was little because we had a multinational channel, and Saturday afternoons at like 5, they'd had some CMLL on, and CMLL and AAA I think was on there. Mainly more so AAA because I remember WWF had a working agreement with them, and there was mini Vaders and mini Mankind's on there. So I was watching Lucha. I didn't know any of the names per se, but I knew I liked what I saw, that it was wrestling, but it was different. And it was something that I knew a lot of my friends or a lot of people really weren't watching. So even from a younger day, I was searching about Japan and stuff like that because, WCW, like we keep going back to, would, bring in the guys from Japan or even the WWF too. So I'd look up, some of the guys from the past, like, Muda, Otani, Masawa, Shinjiro Otani, Kawada, Chono, and stuff like that. So I was into it at a young age, so.
And promotions like Ring of Honor, PWG, When did that come about for you?
Well, PWG and stuff came with YouTube because people were recommending PWG, but Ring of Honor I think also came about by having the greatness as the Fight Network. That it just came on there and I was able to watch it on like my TV, which I thought was really really cool.
Hmm. Oh, and I assume you also started watching TNA then early on when it started.
TNA, I actually found out about the time it happened because at this point I was, on either Napster or WinMax downloading just videos of old matches, and like there was a clip of cruiserweights that came in, and it was a match between Amazing Red and Low Key, where they were doing moves like out of the Matrix, and I had to find out what this was, and then I found out about TNA. Was like searching for it online, would watch some stuff through it there, and then like about 2004, ESPN Classic Canada picked up the rights to air the old TNA Asylum pay-per-views, so they would just air them weekly every Wednesday night. So I'd watch it then. So I became a TNA fan a lot pretty early, actually, way before Spike.
So you mentioned earlier that in 05, 06, that's when you really weren't that happy with the WWE product. Many people consider that to be the peak of TNA. By this point, were you kind of putting TNA number one, WWE number two, or was WWE still always like, that promotion in your heart?
WWE is always going to be the promotion in my heart. I mean, I may for sure like right now, like obviously Ring of Honor and PWG probably are the best in terms of wrestling. But WWE is always going to be there because while it may suck, there's going to be something that's going to draw me back to it no matter what. Like a big angle can happen, or like I'm hooked and I'm going to buy the show. But by '05, I was a fan of TNA. I definitely thought, what they're doing, they have TV. It's something different. So it was on, I believe, Thursdays, which I thought was a good time slot since they had SmackDown and God moved from Thursdays. And I enjoyed it. It was 1 hour. It was good time. I vividly remember enjoying the Kevin Nash X Division angle, even though I know he was burying the guys, but Kevin Nash was pretty funny. And plus the wrestling was great. Like there was a bunch of different guys you never really got to see on television before. So, the likes of Sabin, Shelley, Jay Lethal, Shark Boy, Sonny Siaki even for a period of time was doing his thing, Abyss. So I liked the product. Plus you had some old guys from WWF and WCW, out there doing their thing, like Jeff Jarrett, Jeff Hardy. So
For those wondering, you should probably go into YouTube and look up the Paparazzi Championship Series. Those are some of the best series of vignettes I think ever produced on wrestling television. And also, like you have been recently quoted saying that TNA should die. Quite different from your opinion from 05, 06. When did not just that you didn't like the product, when did the hate for TNA start to come on?
the hate would have to come on for them around 2009. It's like in 2007, the fans just wanted them to get 2 hours, and they got 2 hours. Then they wanted them to get on a better time slot, and they got a better time slot. Then they wanted them to, do something with like Kurt Angle or push this guy, and they do it, but then they just ruin it. Like give Samoa Joe the belt, and they would never do the right thing. It's like they always did what we wanted them to do, and then they just like, we're gonna do it our way. Screw what the fans want. Screw what the fans who were always there to support us wanted. It's like, how many times can I go back to the well and have my heart broken down? So by '09, and when they just started doing these ridiculous angles and thought, having the main event Mafia just run over TV, which was cool, which it wasn't anymore. Having a big faction just run over TV. It wasn't cool anymore. And then when they had the Victory Road '09 pay-per-view with that Jenna Morasca-Sharmell match, I was basically done. I think when I made the I Hope They Die video, I'd only watched one pay-per-view, like in 2010. I'd only watched one pay-per-view, and then I watched Bound for Glory, and I'm like, well, why care? Like, they got Hogan, they got this whole hope. They went on Mondays and they got killed. They brought in Rob Van Dam, who got the biggest pop ever in an Impact Zone, and then they ruined him. Way before that, they ruined Monty Brown. They ruined Samoa Joe. Like, why should I like a product that's ruining careers of young guys?
Did you see any of the product in 2011?
I only saw Bound for Glory, and I was like, well, nothing's changed, so why? Like I did see the X Division matches they had in the summer, which were like, hey, they're great. Since when did Austin Aries decide to go back to TNA? Was my first thought actually. The matches were good, but I'm like, what's it gonna do? Is anything gonna change? So I only saw in full Bound for Glory, and I'm like, wow, nothing's changed. There's no point in me going back to watch this product.
It's kind of a running joke now. People have been doing this for years and years and years. But I always think it's something fun to do at the beginning of the year. Realistically, business wise and everything, creatively, how much longer do you think the company can last?
Well, I heard from in the latest edition of a shoot interview with the Road Dogg and Billy Gunn, and Road Dogg was an agent there. He says that they're going to go on forever and ever because they have, a lot of international deals set up, and plus, so much funding. I think they can go on a very long time, and plus they have backing from Spike TV, which is backing from Viacom. So business-wise, which is the most important way to look at it, they can go on forever. It's just how much fan support are they going to keep losing, which is the real question. So it seems like the fans keep dying and dying and dying. Even the fans at the Impact Zone seem like they don't even care about the product anymore, from what I keep hearing. So I think they can be around for another 10 years, personally. But is anything going to change? No.
Okay. And speaking of wrestling in 2011, for WWE in 2011, I mean, I presume that you just said like big angles will get you back in. I presumed you were into the Punk angle, but were you still a fan of the WWE product in 2011, or was it still kind of pushed to the back?
In 2011, it was honestly, I always give with WWE, and it's not fair for me to do this to TNA either, but I'm sorry, but TNA has hurt my heart way too much. With WWE, when the new year starts, I will watch. I watch everything up to Mania and then see how much I can get hooked. I watched the Royal Rumble, loved it. I didn't watch the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view because I knew that it's normally just a transitional show and it's kind of a waste of money. And then I watched WrestleMania. I thought WrestleMania was a bit of a disappointment, but in general, was I as big of a fan? Not as much, but when the Punk angle happened, it just made me remember why I love wrestling and just how much mainstream publicity it was getting. It made like wrestling seem cool, and that a wrestling fan could come out and talk about wrestling out in the public, wear a wrestling T-shirt around without being ridiculed. So I was a huge fan for it. Plus, I've been a fan of CM Punk since I was like 15. So him getting a big break and then now basically being the most important wrestler in that company is like a thrill for me.
Now, unfortunately, while 2011 did have some great highs, it also had some unfortunate lows. Just wanna when Randy Savage passed away. I mean, he's been mentioned a lot in this interview. I presume he was a big deal to you. How did you react when you first heard about that?
I was stunned. I was shocked, like everybody. I really couldn't believe that it happened because, even though he was in seclusion for that long, uh, basically was in seclusion since that little stint he had in TNA. I was just stunned about it, really. I was heartbroken. I didn't know how to really react. I was more in disbelief that it happened. Um, and I was even more saddened when I found out he just like remarried, and then the pictures were surfaced of like how happy he looked for the first time in like a long, long while. But as well, I got to find out from like a lot of people I work with and stuff like that that they were wrestling fans or at least knew who Randy Savage was, so I could do my Randy Savage impression. Yeah, dig it, ha! In front of them, or I have a Randy Savage T-shirt, and the week after he died, I wore it to work, and one of the guys at my work's like, "Oh my God, that's Randy Savage." Sure, I was a huge Macho Man fan when I'm growing up. And this guy's like 35 years old, so he had like some years on me, and we kind of talked about wrestling and stuff like that. So I don't know, it was definitely sad, but it also had to bring out how wrestling's a part of a lot of people's lives, whether they want to admit it or not.
And also we're gonna my bad, delving a little out of that. Another big influence in your life clearly has been MMA, and we're just wondering when did you really start becoming a fan of the MMA product?
I became a fan of MMA kind of around the same time I started liking wrestling. Like, I think I'd liked wrestling for a year, year and a half, and then it was MMA because I'd go to the video store, like I already mentioned, and rent tapes. And then I saw this tape of this logo that I wasn't familiar with in the wrestling section, and I was always, well, I like wrestling. I try to watch, even as a young kid, I tried to watch as much different wrestling so I didn't become a niche of one product, and if I saw something different, be like, well, that's stupid, and not watch it. For example, with like football, I will watch any different bit of football. So I saw this tape there, and I rented it, and it was UFC 3. And I just remember thinking it was going to be fake because it was in the wrestling section. Even like I said, I kind of was on to wrestling being worked. So it was Keith Hackney and Emmanuel Yarbrough. And Emmanuel Yarbrough was like a 600-pound sumo. And I remember Keith Hackney dropping this guy and beating him. It was just, there's so many similarities. There were these characters, like especially on UFC 3, you had Chemo, Keith Hackney, Ken Shamrock was on that show. And then you had like this upset win of Steve Jenham winning the tournament out of nowhere, where it was supposed to be Hoist Gracie, Ken Shamrock in the finals, a rematch, but both got hurt. And then this guy from nowhere, Steve Jenham, wins it against Harold Howard, who was another character in his own right. I was kind of hooked and intrigued from MMA at that point on.
Wow. And did it ever? I mean, obviously we've been saying WWE is the promotion in your heart, but at the same time, you did watch. I presume you watched more MMA than pro wrestling 2011. Did MMA? Was there a point when MMA surpassed pro wrestling as your true love?
I would say actually when I was in high school, like I would watch MMA on the undergrounds. Like I have basically, with the exception of the Dark Era SEG shows, I have seen probably about every I've seen every pay per view that SEG produced and basically everything that Zuffa has produced. But when George St. Pierre beat Matt Hughes for the welterweight title for the first time, that was a huge thing in my high school, and that's when I was like, whoa. People actually watch this MMA. Plus, around actually when I was in the first year of high school was when the Ultimate Fighter started taking off, and I kind of bonded with some of the kids there. I mean, in gym class, and that's all we talked about was the Ultimate Fighter and how, awesome it was. Like, I know a lot of people wanted Josh Koscheck to die on that show, and I was a big Josh Koscheck fan. And I remember when he actually fought Diego Sanchez in the UFC like a couple years later, and Koscheck won, how I got to rub that in people's faces. Made me the happiest kid in the world. So basically, when I was in high school, early parts of high school, MMA kind of started to take over because wrestling had its moments. Like, WrestleMania 23 was a pretty cool moment. Edge being champion, the whole Edge run. But there's something about, George St. Pierre winning this, legitimate belt. And, it's a real sport. You can talk with people. I remember being on free period talking with some teachers about Ken Shamrock, Tito Ortiz 3.
Wow.
So,
yeah,
that was pretty big deal.
And a lot of people are also saying that MMA has kind of MMA. It's a line that many people have said. MMA does pro wrestling better than pro wrestling does. Why do you think that MMA has just far surpassed pro wrestling in terms of popularity and growth over the past few years?
Because I think pro wrestling is trying to do too much away from the fans. Like, pro wrestling right now doesn't even want to be called pro wrestling. They want to be called, at least with WWE, but, a lot of the people follow that. Like, TNA will follow whatever WWE does. They'll just try to stick it away. They call it entertainment. They do it too cartoony. They think they're, a super cartoon show with really nothing related. Like, I remember seeing when Carlito ran into that wall with Hornswoggle, that moment was like, okay, this is officially the stupidest shit ever. MMA is just booking it like how WWE used to do it, in the Attitude Era or when they were starting up. They're making their titles mean something. They're building up challengers. They have important people with strong personalities. They're just doing that. And plus with like how they're doing it business-wise, they're making pay-per-views seem worthwhile to buy. Now they're getting, on Fox and having free shows, kind of like, their Saturday night main events. What else can I say? Just like business-wise, how they're marketing, merchandise, how they're promoting internationally. It's just like watching, Vince do his thing in the 80s. It's just only modern day, and plus, it's real.
I see. And you mentioned George St. Pierre. You mentioned Josh Koscheck. Who would you label as the MMA star that you really maybe not you consider your favorite? Like more of a representative, like how Bret Hart was, how Randy Savage was, how Shawn Michaels was. Who would be that representative for MMA for you?
Um, I don't know. With these types of things, like I said with wrestling, I have a lot of guys. With MMA, it was more. I just loved the whole athleticism and just it was something really different. It was a different form of a sport, with a lot of similarities to me with wrestling that I loved and I could market to my friends as something cool to watch. St. Pierre would be one of them because he was on mainstream sports when he'd have a fight where a lot of guys in the States couldn't even fathom that. So I would say for sure, probably George would be the guy for me, even though if he is to fight Nick Diaz eventually, I will be cheering for Nick Diaz as well, but it'd be a lot of the like Koscheck, Diego Sanchez, because Diego Sanchez of fights. Nick Diaz, Carl Parisian fights were just incredible stuff. So I guess it'd be George Koscheck and Diego Sanchez.
Okay.
If I had to pick guys.
Yeah. And what was like I said with pro wrestling? What was if it's now fine? What would you consider the peak of your MMA interest?
I'd still say it's still growing. I don't think there's not been a peak yet. It's the sport is still so young and it's still growing. There's still lots to even be accomplished, mainly with the sport getting sanctioned in the state of New York. That my peak hasn't happened. I'm still a rabid fan and nothing's peaked.
And also many people, and kind of a same question, different format. Would you consider like right now your favorite time that you've been an MMA fan, or it's still just getting better and better?
I think right now it's a great time to be a fan of MMA. I don't think there's a favorite time at this point in time. Like, looking back, especially with the whole YouTube thing and the people I know from YouTube, like I know Truth Slayer and I will say maybe the greatest moment for us was the night Brock Lesnar won the title and the internet fucking died. Like, absolutely exploded. Like, we tried to go on Sheerdog just to see how much and the stupidity the comments would happen from the fans. And granted, I like Sheerdog. I think the Jordan Breen show is a fantastic show. And many of the other columnists, I think those guys understand the difference between wrestling and MMA can coexist and they understand business as well. But the Sheerdog fans, the hardcore MMA fans don't. So we got a big ride off of that. But as a whole, it's a great time to be a fan right now. I mean, the sport's on mainstream television right now. Like on January 28th, you can watch some of the best fights for free, like 3 awesome fights for free, and it just keeps growing and growing. So I think if you want to pick something as an alternative from wrestling, if you're bored, why not pick MMA?
And also MMA this past year in 2011 got a lot of talk for the falling buy rates, all the injuries, all the disappointing main events. Like I knew personally a few friends in school who I used to watch MMA with, but now no longer are into it because they don't feel they can get invested into a main event because they're only 50% sure that the match will actually happen. Would you consider this like one of the really major problems of the sport, but do you think it can be fixed?
It's a risk. You can't. It's a risk you're gonna will to take with a real athletic sport where a guy can get hurt and have to pull out. It's something that makes the sport interesting. For example, like just right now, it was supposed to be like Nick Diaz and George St. Pierre. Well, they pulled Nick Diaz out. They were going to put George St. Pierre, Carlos Condit. They didn't have that fight because both guys got hurt in training. Then it was BJ Penn, Nick Diaz. And then that fight was awesome. And now it's led
Yes.
to basically the whole situation where it's supposed to be Nick Diaz, George St. Pierre again. George gets hurt, and now it's Carlos Condit and Nick Diaz. So a great thing has happened. Where it's created new stars, which is something I think we need. Like, I never would have thought Nick Diaz would have been this huge. Like, he could probably be one of the top mixed martial artists on earth right now. I don't think that's a fair criticism to have that you can't get into it because the main event's going to change. It's a risk you're going to have to take with a real athletic sport. It's happened a bajillion times in boxing, and I think in reality it can make the sport better because new people are going to be known to the masses.
Do you also feel that? I mean, there was a lot this year, and looking at the schedule for next year, it's good and bad in a way. Do you feel there's too many shows, or as a fan, you're just excited to see all of them and it doesn't bother you?
I do feel a little bit that there's too many shows. Like especially this weekend, Strikeforce is having a show, and we all know Strikeforce now is owned by Zuffa. And if I were them, I don't think I'd pick the first weekend of 2012 to do it because I think a lot of people still need to adjust to how their normal schedule goes after the holidays. And plus, it's the same weekend you have NFL Wild Card, especially the game that is going to be basically kind of going like up in battle against with the Detroit Lions and New Orleans Saints. They definitely ran a bit too many pay-per-views. Like some of the shows they ran pay-per-view wise were kind of questionable. I don't know if I would have ever, would you really, if you weren't a hardcore fan, would you buy it? I don't think so. I think that's what the Fox deal, what kind of gives it leeway, that there's going to be a lot of shows, but there's not going to be as many pay-per-views. So if you're going to buy something, you may now pick something that's worthwhile buying, as there's going to be a lot of strong fights for free. As we already talked about the Fox show, but on January 20th on FX, Jim Miller and Melvin Gillards are having a hell of a lightweight main event, which should be very interesting for title implications as well as both guys can get right back in the picture. So I think there are a lot of shows, and it is maybe a little bit annoying as say you want to do something on a Saturday night, it's taken up. But I guess with the lack of pay-per-views this year, because there's going to be less with the whole Fox deal, it's kind of a good thing. So I can see the negative, but I can see there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Sort of to give them a plug. I mean, you mentioned the Melvin Gillard and the Jim Miller fight. Obviously, there's a lot of shows I think scheduled for January. The Fox show in late January. The next show I believe is the Aldo Mendez fight and that show. And just give a quick plug. What do you think of that show? How do you think that's going to be? Is it worth buying on pay per view?
I don't think the main event to me is definitely not something I'd be worthwhile seeing because personally, I don't think Chad Mendes has enough to beat Jose Aldo. Like Chad Mendes will have the wrestling advantage, but if Chad Mendes say he's in control, it's going to be 5 rounds of him just taking Aldo down and holding him, which isn't interesting. I believe there's a fight between Anthony Johnson's on that show in middleweight action. I forget his opponent at this point in time, but that should
Vitor Belfort.
Isn't Belfort?
Yeah.
Okay, so it is. He's still fighting Belfort. I thought they would have taken him Vitor off since he's coaching Ultimate Fighter Brazil. But that's an interesting fight there since Belfort did beat Yoshihiro Akiyama pretty quickly in Philadelphia back at 133. So I mean, there's some intrigue in it, but the main event. It's going to take a lot for the featherweights to still, be able to draw fans in. I don't know how fans are going to remember the 5th-round war that Aldo had against Mark Hominick, and then he defended the belt again against Kenny Florian in a really non-memorable fight.
Okay. And if you would say the one show to look out for in January, to check out UFC if you're not a fan, I presume you would mean the Fox show?
Basically, I wouldn't say that there is a fight to check out in January. Like, check out the Fox show for sure because it's something very important that we keep watching. But if I had to say there's a fight for you to check out this year, check out Carlos Condit, Nick Diaz. That's a fight that's going to be just violence ensued. And probably, if you're not a fan of mixed martial arts, you'll be a fan of mixed martial arts just on that fight alone.
Okay. And now let's just kind of delve into some of these questions here. Some are kind of all over the place. This man asks, who is the better white rapper? Cage, R.A. the Rugged Man, Ill Bill, Vinny Paz from JMT, Copyright, or Slug from Atmosphere?
I have no idea who any of those people are. I honestly have no idea who any of those people are. I have toned down listening to a lot of rap. I'm trying to get back into it, but I have no idea who any of those people are. They're all great.
Sorry, Sean from Auckland, New Zealand. Would you consider Bret Hart one of your idols? Well, we already mentioned that. What do you think of the card of the matches that could happen at Mania 28? Is it good enough card on paper for right now?
I would say so. I mean, we already have Cena Rock, which, when Rock, I wasn't too big of his stuff that he did around in November. It just seemed they wanted him to uh, promote Twitter and a lot of the promos, more so than the pay-per-view. But I think that match will do well when Rock comes back, for a long period of time. Plus, it's supposed to be Chris Jericho, CM Punk, which should be just tremendous. And then, of course, Triple H, Undertaker, which, to me, the Undertaker the past couple of years has sold WrestleMania alone, just on the streak. So at that moment, there's something that's going to be, worthwhile getting. Plus, I'm sure there's going to be an undercard match that can steal the show. Who knows? Obviously, it looks like they're trying to turn Daniel Bryan heel. And if you remember him from Ring of Honor as a heel, what a dick of a heel. So he was a fantastic heel. I think whoever they pair him with, it should be some good stuff. So right now, I would say I'm enjoying where they're going with the pre-build to Mania, but I guess I can't totally say that until I see what happens after the Royal Rumble, because that's when you get the real picture.
And this guy asks, should they ever end the Undertaker streak?
Absolutely not. It's the best thing going. It's one of the best things they have. It's immortal, and I don't think anyone in the locker room even wants to end it.
How much time do you think he has left?
I think, honestly, this could be Undertaker's last year. I don't want to see the man, have terrible matches or come back for long programs. If he came back from WrestleMania every year, I could be down with it, but personally, I think this is his last year.
Okay. Another guy asks, if you could ever ask Vince McMahon one question, what would it be and why?
Could you ever ask Vince McMahon one question, what would it be? My question to Vince would be, can I ask him two?
Yeah. Go ahead.
My first would be, what the heck were you thinking with the WBF? and I guess another one, I have a lot all over the place. I guess another one would be, would he ever have gotten Bruiser Brody?
Interesting. This guy asks, you've mentioned before that you've read a lot of pro wrestling books that delve a lot into the history of pro wrestling. What books would you recommend that give great info on the wrestling business?
A lot of the Greg Oliver books do a good job. A lot of them are historical books about, certain guys, like his top tag teams or his top Canadians. It's, some of these guys you'll never maybe even find a match of, but just the history behind it do a good well. So look up a lot of the Greg Oliver stuff. Of course, there's Death of WCW. I'm trying to think of what else. It's been a while since I've looked at my book list, actually. There's that. There's a book out there on the history of Memphis, which I thought was fantastic. As well, if you're looking for a book on the history of MMA, get Total MMA by Jonathan Snowden. It's a fantastic book. It's probably one of the best books I've ever read.
Fun fact, for all those listening, I actually got Total MMA as a Christmas present for Christmas from one of my uncles, and I just started it, but I really like it so far. So definitely,
it's definitely a great book. It depends how far are you into it.
Yeah, very early, but
okay.
But I like. But
it's really good. Just learning the history of jiu-jitsu and wrestlers, and realizing that pro wrestling going back even to the early 30s has a big part to do with MMA. And when they get to the whole, building of UFC, and basically it kind of ends around the time Lesnar comes. I don't want to spoil anything, but just a great story, and it's something you should keep reading. He made another book called MMA Encyclopedia, and it is actually a legit encyclopedia on every guy that has ever fought MMA. So if you're ever curious, check out that one too.
And just another one. I haven't read this one, but everyone recommends it. It's on my book list, right behind Total MMA and Randy Couture's biography. National Wrestling Alliance, The Untold Story of the Monopoly That Strangled Pro Wrestling. I heard that one's awesome too, so there's a recommendation.
I have that book, and I have tried to get into it, but you have to have a lot of time on your hands. It starts out learning the fact that there's two NWAs, and I guess one promoter put another one out of business to form one conglomerate, and just how much mob stuff went on in the way back then. It was just, I didn't have enough time to get really into it, but it goes like really in depth, like till like TNA. So it's a damn sure good book as well. A lot of the stuff. There's a book about Stampede Wrestling, which I really recommend. Heath McCoy is one of the writers on it, so definitely check that out.
I believe that book is called Pain and Passion or something like
Yes,
that.
it's a great book. I believe, yes, that's a great book.
All right. Now another question. Have you ever made? This one's a little random, but whatever. Have you ever made friends with one of your college professors?
Yes.
All right then.
Well, yes, I have. One of my editing teachers. Pretty good friends with him. He doesn't teach at our school anymore, but I talked to him, and he was actually a wrestling friend because we had to do a project about like the history of TV, and our group got like the '80s, and I, of course, just talked about wrestling and its importance on cable. And like I think I was like the reason the group got such a decentish mark. One guy talked about Nintendo, which is nothing to do with TV. Anyways, so during like the break he gave us, we're talking about the NWA and Crockett's, and it was pretty awesome actually. And he was telling me he was reading the Road Warriors book that just came out I think last year.
Yeah.
So I mean I haven't read that one, but he's a big fan, and we were talking about UFC, so it was pretty cool that he's kind of like me. So we've talked before about stuff like that.
Did you ever decide pro wrestling isn't for me anymore and all I care about is MMA? And if so, did the indies ever rekindle your love for pro wrestling?
I'd say the indies definitely brought a whole, like, I can kind of treat this as something, if I could be a journalist, I'd want to be, because, like I said, I was a fan of CM Punk since I was like 15, and then you watch him go from Ring of Honor and the indies to, OVW and then WWE, and then he's the biggest thing in the world. And then you just see a bunch of these guys that, eventually are on your TV, like TNA, like TNA's X Division, and even WWE into its own right. It just made me rekindle why I watch it, because a lot of those angles are just 20 times better than what's going on mainstream right now.
Another question. One of our last questions. Besides pro wrestling and MMA, what's your favorite sport?
Besides pro wrestling and MMA, I'd say my favorite sport actually would be football. I'm a big football fan. I already mentioned it here. I can watch any football. Growing up, I could watch, NFL, CFL, arena football, XFL. I remember watching the very first season and liking it, actually. Because some of the stuff the XFL had, logic, like TV-wise, was very cool. How the NFL even stole the glide cam from them. And I watched the UFL when it was on HDNet. So, I'm a big football fan as well as hockey. Before the strike, I'd say I was a much bigger hockey fan than I am now, but I love hockey too.
All right. And finally, before we sign off here, what is the Dirty White Boy outside of YouTube, pro wrestling, MMA? What do you do? What goes on? Aspirations?
Like, what are my other interests?
Like, what are your job-wise right now? Like, career-wise, what do you want to do? Where you're heading? What are you learning? That stuff.
Well, I'd like to be a broadcaster. I've gone to school for TV broadcasting. I've graduated out of a program already doing that, and I'm taking a videography program. So I have done some stuff on TV as a sideline reporter for roller derby, which once again has a little bit of wrestling kind of built in there. And I've on air got to interview a girl with the roller derby name Ravishing Roxy Rude, and we basically turned this into a wrestling interview. So that's basically what I would like to do. I'm still in school. I've done some stuff freelance videography wise, so it's all working out in that department so far. Knock on wood. So I would like to do something like that, but my main goal is to be an on-air person, since I've been a fan of commentary, whether it's Bob Costas, Al Michaels, Ron McLean, who's up here in Canada, Jim Ross, Bobby Heenan, Jerry Lawler, even Vince. I would use some Vince McMahon-isms on the air if I could. Like, what a maneuver, or he's got him. No. So that's what my main goal would love. I'd love to be an on-air personality.
And I wish you luck with that, man.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you for being on the show. It's been a great interview. We got a lot of great content, and I really appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, guys. Also another thing we have to do. Before you leave, is there anything else you want to plug? Just anything in general that you want people to know about?
I'll plug my YouTube account, I guess. It's been a while since I have made a video. I think since October when I reviewed the Scott Hall piece that aired on ESPN. It'd be, of course, youtube.com/Dadirrtywhyteboi. I'm sure Big Rat will put links in there. And my Twitter, which is the same, only it is missing the I in Dadirrtywhyteboi, as Twitter wouldn't let me put that in because there were too many characters or something of the sort. So I'll let Big Rat for sure put the links in there. Definitely give me a follow. I definitely make a lot of wrestling references to major sports that air, with football, hockey, even events that go on in the news. I'm a pretty comical kind of guy, so they're half-hearted tweets. Sometimes I can get a little angry and tweet negative stuff, but I'm worth the follow. Don't know if Big Rat will tell you that. Probably I am. So give me a follow and subscribe to my YouTube account. I'm going to try and make some videos again. I really do want to watch the New Japan show. Maybe I'll review that. Maybe I'll just come back and give my thoughts on wrestling as a whole. But definitely, I plan on making a comeback as well.
And we all look forward to it. All right. With that, we are done. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.